All right, so we're going to create another Python or another Django project just in order to do this. So we'll have to create a virtual environment first. So Python source and pip install Django. All right, cool. Now, once we have Django installed, in order to start a project, so Django has, there's a project, which is like the big thing, and then there's apps. You can have one or more apps in a given project. So Django admin start project, and we'll just call it my site for now. So we have this Django project right there. So we'll cd into my site, and then we will create an app. So Python. So notice we have we've cd'd into this into our project, and we have manage.py available to us, which is, we need to use manage.py to do things. So Python, was it start app, and we'll call it so we'll see if that worked. We go into our project, and we can see that we have app users. All right, so we have models, tests, views. None of this stuff is filled in yet. So what we want to do is we're going to create a model first. And I'm just going to make the very simplest model, and then we'll try to run some tests, and we'll talk about validators. So class app user. So this is going to extend models. So we've imported models. We're going to send models.model. Here's the basic model class that we'll be extending. And we'll have a first name is models. And again, we'll use models dot, and then there's a whole bunch of options, character field, whatever, integer, whatever we're doing. We use character field, and character field requires a max length property. So we'll just do that. And last name. Okay, so this is all we're going to do for our model, basically. Very simple. And then maybe, so we're not, yeah. So here in tests, we're also going to write some tests. So we saw in the previous thing how tests work, basically, but we'll do class. So we'll extend or inherit from Python's or Django's test case, which is basically kind of a wrapper around Python's unit test library. So class method, test.
They're actually instance methods.
Oh, here. Okay, thank you.
Unless you're doing something extra special.
I am not. The other example was using class. I didn't try not using class methods, but we didn't actually use the class instance. So I didn't check that.
If this is if this is a regular test case, sorry, if this is
Yeah,
a regular
yeah.
test case, then it's instance methods. But if they did something that I don't know either, if they did something extra custom in the setup, I might be wrong. So
Okay, cool. Well, thank you. So we'll use normal, just normal instance methods here. So we have test create user, and we have our model. So let's just see if we can create a user. So Bob equals, so we'll have to import the model. So app user. App user, so, and we'll do first name equals Bob. Last name is Jones. And we'll save Bob. There's a couple ways you could use also the object create, which will basically do the same thing. And then what we're going to do is test. So assert equal, and then we'll check if Bob is equal to dot get, something like that. So we'll see if this works. So we'll, in order to run the test, we'll have to run the manage.py test. So Python manage.py test. Okay, so this fails for a couple reasons. The first is that we haven't actually created our database, right? So in order to actually do anything, you need to run migration. So we've created this model, but our actual application, we don't have a database. There's no tables, there's no nothing. So Python manage.py, and we can do make migrations. So the first time you don't actually need to do make migrations because nothing will have changed, but so the first time you do it, there's a whole bunch of built-in. So if we look at the setting, we're also gonna have to add our app to the settings, but we look at the settings file. You can see in the installed apps, there are all these built-in apps that Django gives us for free. So that's where all of this database activity is coming from. Now what we did, again, so we made a couple mistakes. One is that we just started writing some code and then we tried to run it, and that doesn't work. So then we realized that we have to actually migrate our code. We have to basically transform our code into SQL, into the database. And the other thing we have to do is we have to tell Django that we have this other app. We have to specifically tell the project that we have this other app that we made. So my site. So now if we run make migrations, I guess we already migrated that. It should have. Let me see if that is in there. All right, well, let's try running the test actually. right, so in tests, app user, test create user, be able to import test module. Doesn't declare an explicit app label. It isn't. Oh, I think I'm just not importing it properly. So
Hey, Chad, I think your
Yeah.
issue was in settings.
Okay, let's see.
For installed apps, I think you wanted to put app users instead of my site on line 40.
Oh, geez, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I should, if I try running make migrations, that will be different now. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. So yeah, so now that I've correctly informed the project that there's something new here, I can run make migrations. And now that there's something different about my database. So the model that created is basically being prepped to be added to the database. So I'll actually migrate, and that will alter the database. Okay, and now if I try running the test, hopefully I will get a normal failure or a pass in that case. So tests, it looks like we can actually create a user and then save it, and then we can make sure that it actually exists. So we create it and then we pull it out from the database. All right, so that's fine, but the whole point of validations is so that you can make sure that whatever's in your database is reliable. So if you have people's phone numbers in your database, you don't want a database full of, some people use dashes, some people use parentheses, some people, just put in 11111. There's some people have too many numbers, too few. There's all kinds of things that you can have that makes your data less valuable or consistent. So you can validate user input at several different points. So the kind of first line of defense is in HTML. So you can, make sure that someone, and actually there's a lot of validations built into HTML. So if you use, if you have a field that's labeled as email, then HTML will do some validation. So you can't submit a form that for email if there's not an @ sign or something like that. So you can do validation on the front end. You can do validation. We haven't talked about the views yet, but you can do validation in the views. This is kind of like the core logic of Django, which we haven't got to yet, but you can do logic there. So you get a request object in, and you can check it to make sure that it's formatted properly, not just for inadvertent things, but also for malicious things like SQL injection attacks, things like that. And then you can also do checks on your models or the actual database. So things like max length here, right? So it's even if something gets from HTML through your views and it gets through those two checkpoints and you try to save it in your database, but it's longer than 100 words, it will be rejected there. So so where do you put validations? The answer is that you want to put them everywhere, because you don't want, it can be kind of messy if you don't pick up on some kind of error until, halfway in. And you also don't want to just front load your defenses well, you don't want to only have validation HTML, because then if someone, you can use curl or Postman or some other way of hitting your backend, or hitting an endpoint that's not a web browser. So you need to be able to handle that as well. So what we're going to do first off, in order to validate individual fields, we can include a validators function. So we can write our own custom methods for checking stuff. So let's just say that let's say that we want all first names and last names to start with a capital letter. So all right, so names have to start with a capital letter. So let's Let's look at validators real quick just to see. So this is the Django documentation for validators. Validator is a callable that takes a value and raises a validation error. So here we have an example. So this is some kind of function that checks if a number is even. And then if it's not, it raises this validation error that was mentioned right here. And then it says, so here's where we actually put the validator, right? So we can write a function, we actually have to put it here. So we're in our models and we have this even field. And then it looks like we can pass, just like we have a max length here, which is, you can think of as like a built-in validator. You can also pass in another field, which is validators, and it will take an array of validator functions. So validate even. So it looks like we can make our own custom validators, which is nice. There's also built-in validators for common tasks, like email validator. So if you need to validate email, you could try writing your own, and that's fine. But probably for basic tasks, something built in would be better. So there's all kinds of validators, min value. So min value, for example. So you can control how many characters something can be, but that may not be quite enough. So you can say, you can't enter a number that's greater than, 1,000,000 or whatever, depending on whatever your application is doing. So there's built-in validators and custom validators. So we're going to look at custom validators. So we'll use this documentation as our basic model. So we can start with validators equals this array. So in addition to max length, we'll do validators, and we don't know what we're going to put in there yet, but let's go ahead and add it. All right, so let's make sure that the name starts with capital, so def. And so value is going to be whatever this field is. So in this case, I guess we could call it name. And so what we'll do is we'll check. So if that is not, so if name at 0, that is lower. I think this is a function. Let me double check. Okay, cool. So that looks like that works. So if name that is lower, then we will return a validation error. So we're going to follow the model here. So we'll raise a validation error. And we could do this, and that's fine. I'm just going to do something slightly simpler just for our purposes here. And I'm just going to raise it as a string. All right, so that's pretty simple. I'm also going to need to import validation error. So I'm getting a little warning here. So I'll copy this line from django.core.exceptions. All right. So now let's add this validator. So validation error, validation error. All right, cool. So now we have this model and we have our first name and last name, and we have our validators going.
You just specified what it raises, not what to check it with.
Can you say it again?
You specified the type of error that starts with
Oh,
cap raises.
All right, thank you, validators. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, I guess I should have worded that
No, that's
in the reverse.
good. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So now we have an actual function now that we're passing into validators, and this function is going to check if the first letter is a capital. Otherwise, it's going to raise a validation error. So you would expect that this is just going to kind of work, and we'll see if it does. So let's write another test. So we tested a valid user. So all right, and we'll do, let's try this. Actually, so this will not return false. So what we want to happen is for this to raise a validation error. So we'll wrap this in a try except block. So this is kind of automatically importing this for me. So we'll raise that as a validation error. And then we can actually check the validation error. So assert contains, something like this. I think this should work. So let's see if this works. Okay, so that does work. Let's write another test that checks if Jim actually gets saved to the database. So this actually shouldn't be happening. So instead of this, subsert equal, we'll do 0. So we should have no one in our database because Jim shouldn't have been added to it. It looks like Jim was added to the database.
You're only getting 2 dots.
Sorry, one of you, go ahead.
Isn't Bob being added as well?
Yes, we could try doing this. I believe that these tests should all run independently. So this is kind of a weird thing about Django. If we look into the documentation, how validators are run, validators will not be run automatically when you save a model. But if you are using a model form, it will run your validators on any fields that are included in your form. So we're not using a model form. This is a bit, let's see if we can, anything else here. Validating objects. So there are 3 steps involved in validating a model. Validate the model fields with clean fields, then validate the model as a whole, model.clean, and validate field uniqueness. So all 3 steps are performed when you call a model's full clean method. Okay, so the long and short of it is that this validator isn't automatically going to be checked, even though we've written it and we've put it on our model, and it looks like it's working. Python, Django isn't actually going to run it on its own. So we kind of have to specifically say, hey, go ahead and check this out. So we can do this in our test. Instead of just gym.save, we can do gym. Is it full clean? Might have to. So let's try doing that instead.
Do you need to attempt to save it after it's been full cleaned to test whether or not it's actually getting in there?
Sorry, can you say it one more time?
So how, after you do your full clean, what do you do next? If it is good.
So you can do full clean. So we'll talk about the steps that are involved. And there are different places to do this. The basic lesson for right now is that you have to explicitly tell Django to run these validation checks.
Okay.
And then you would .save. If the full clean passes all the validators, then it's saying yes, your validators have all of them have passed, therefore all your data is clean and ready to go. So you can now perform a save and save the entry into the database. So after full clean, you would say gym.save.
Yeah. So there are a few other, so hopefully it wouldn't get to gym.save. And we can also, we'll look at this in a sec, but it depends on where you want to implement this logic. So we could implement this logic in our models, so we wouldn't have to call full.clean explicitly here. But I think we're getting an error. So we're getting the right error here, but something else is happening. String object has no attribute status code. I think it's because I'm half-assing this right here. Let me see. Let's see. So I'm not creating a message dict, but let me see if that does it anyway. All right, I'll worry about that in a sec. But for now, so this is actually, we're actually checking now our validator. So we can actually run this. So another thing, so let's look at another level of validation. So you have to figure out this test first. So it contains, and the message is actually, so first name.
Question, Chad.
Yeah.
In the exercise files, they're doing the test cases are assert true. Does that make a difference at all?
Yeah, there's all kinds of assert statements you could do.
Does that affect the test too
It's
much?
just I mean, they all the assert statements basically do the same thing. It's just kind of a matter of what specifically you want to test. So you could just use assert equal for everything, I think, in principle, and just play around with how you do. But yeah, they're all just
Okay.
kind of variations on the same thing.
Okay. And does it matter if we create the instance outside of the try? Should that matter?
Create the instance outside of the try?
Like your line 14, if you put that above the try?
Yeah, I think in theory that would be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, so. Because the thing that's going to generate the error is when we try to run the full clean. Okay, so this is just kind of minor stuff. This is probably a little hacky, but that's fine. So now we are actually getting the validation error. We can see that this message that we've sent, so we're checking the contents of the error message, basically.
And that's because first name was the field. So your validation error is responding with the dictionary of the key is the field that broke, and the value is an array of potential messages because it could have broke on like 3 different things.
Yeah, so the way so here, I think probably the proper way to do this, where was that? In the basic example, it basically, you tell it specifically the value to give and so on. But it looks like if you don't specify, it will do that by default. So, so this now, as long as we're calling, at least in our tests, we're calling full.clean. In our application, are we calling full.clean? Maybe, maybe not. But here, so we have to specifically call full.clean in order for the validators to actually run. So here we're calling it in our test, but we would obviously need to call it somewhere in our application as well. So we have this case. So now this works. So you can create a user, a normal user. Let's run those both tests together. And that works. And then we can create another user, except poorly formatted name, and we run full clean on it, which will actually run our test that throws a validation error, and we're checking for that. So that's great. And we're testing individual fields. The next kind of question is, what happens if we want to run a test that involves checking both of these fields? So this is a little more complicated. So we're calling, so we saw in this documentation. Ugh. One sec here. Where was that? Query set model. I think it was this model instance. Validating objects. Okay, here we go. Validating objects. So there are 3 steps. And as we know from object classes and object-oriented programming, all that good stuff, we can override properties. So we're inheriting from models.model, this Python right here, models.model. So it comes with a whole bunch of methods that it's going to run. So we can override them. So clean fields is one. You can also override clean. So validate the model as a whole. So if we want to validate the model as a whole, i.e. not just one particular field, then we're going to have to do something a little bit more complicated. So we'll try overriding the built-in clean method here. So the clean method, what we could do, so we have a few options. So this is going to run when we call full clean. We can write more specific validation functions, or we can just run some logic in here directly. Since we're just doing one thing, I'll just put all of the logic in here. So we're going to do a test, and we're going to say if first name Jose and I don't know if I spelled Rodriguez right, but
yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So we'll if someone's name is Jose and their last name is Rodriguez, we'll raise a validation error. We'll say all right, there's nothing worse you could do to a person. It's just so we don't want to allow that in our application. So so now let's try writing a test here. And first we'll do the try except block. We'll create an instance. Is that a G? Yeah, okay. I'm terrible at spelling, so I'm going to hope that I spelled that right 2 times in a row. And we'll do
Didn't you call the function just clean though?
I did. So when we run, I don't know where it said that. Let me see.
It actually said it where you had it at, where it lists the 3 steps that happen. It says that all 3 steps are performed when you call full clean. 1, 2, and 3 happen when full clean is called.
Yeah, so it's a little bit complicated. Unfortunately, it's So you could also override the save function and run all of this logic in the save function, so we don't have to run it in the tests. But all of these methods exist, so you can override them. So that's both a blessing and a curse. And then what do we say here? Of course, I use single quotes. All right, so let's try on that, and it fails. E is not defined, right? So except not first name either. So I think here I may have an issue with whatever I'm getting. So this is just me not being very professional, but so that works out. So my tests obviously could be better, but so here we have this user. We try to create it, and it would pass. It'll pass these individual validating tests on each field because it starts with a capital letter. But before it actually gets saved, since we overrode the clean, this clean will get called, and it will throw this validation error. So we can, basically check. We can kind of take a step back from the individual fields and look at the model as a whole, and then run tests or validation based on that. So that is basically it. We could also, again, so we could also override the save method here if we wanted to. So we don't have to call full clean every time. But just so you know, this is kind of a peculiarity of how Django works. Are there any questions about that?